In the early days of shooting videos, I had no clue what to charge, and as a result, I ended up shooting myself in the foot multiple times and creating a lot of issues for myself. When you're first starting out, you have no frame of reference for what to charge. You don't want to charge too much because a client might say no, or because of that imposter syndrome telling you that you shouldn't be charging that much. But if you charge too little, then you don't make enough money to sustain your business, let alone grow it. Maybe you just got your first paid project, or you've been doing this for a while, but you still don't have a consistent workflow for arriving at a price. In either case, I'm going to show you a few pricing strategies and what I recommend you do when you're first starting out. Now, there are many different ways to come to a price. You may have heard of things like time-based pricing, value-based pricing, but we're just going to simplify this whole process and break it down into 3 easy steps. Keep in mind, this is just one of many options and is a suggested template that you can use when you're starting out, but it should be modified and tweaked to fit your workflow and your personal needs. Step 1 is to figure out the scope of your project. Scope is a summary of everything that's going to be required to get to that final product. That includes everything from the amount of time you're going to need to invest to equipment rentals, location rentals, and more. The price of the video needs to reflect how much work is going to be required of you in order to deliver that video. That's why we need to figure out up front all the work that's going to be involved in getting to that final result. We figure out the scope of our project by making sure that we're asking enough intelligent questions when we sit down with a client to figure out what resources are we going to need in order to deliver the vision that they have. Now, your client's not going to be able to tell you whether or not you need to rent lights or hire a first AC. That's all stuff you need to figure out on your own, but we can't do that unless we understand thoroughly exactly the vision that they have for the video. If I know what they want it to look like, I can start to piece together in my head what lights I'm going to need to achieve that look for that setup, or if I'm going to need to hire someone to operate a Steadicam for that shot. So the first time you sit down with your client, make sure you have a way to take detailed notes about what they want, because you can refer to that later to figure out how to translate that into the logistics that you need. Once you know the scope of your project, the next step is to translate that into hard numbers. You cannot run a successful, profitable business without first making sure that your own expenses are paid for and taken care of. I know we get caught up in getting the gig and people wanting to pay for our work, but remember, it's not just about being paid. You have to be paid enough to be actually making a profit. Making videos is not cheap, so we need to make sure that we're accurately totaling up all of our expenses, or else you might find yourself undercharging and potentially losing money as a result. Once you've put together that scope, you've got a good idea of what kind of shots you need to do and what's going to be required in them. So if you know you're going to need to rent a gimbal for a shot, you can easily go look up what it would cost to rent it and assign a hard figure to that. Same thing goes for lighting, hiring crew, catering, transportation, all of that stuff. And if you can't arrive at an exact number, you're gonna at least have a very accurate estimate to now base your price off of. Now, it can be hard to think of all the potential costs of a project and make sure you're covering all your bases, so I'm gonna list some potential expenses you might have here to give you some ideas and make sure that you're not missing anything. Now, not only should you be incorporating the actual project costs, like what you're gonna need for the shoot itself, but your business also has basic operating expenses, things like an internet bill, your Adobe subscription. It's a good idea to take things like that and incorporate at least a percentage of those costs into each project bill. This might be a little tedious and take some time to figure out, but remember, if you're not covering your expenses first and foremost for the project and to operate your business, you're not going to be able to make a profit on top of that. Now, before we get to this final step, you might be a beginner that's asking, well, what if I don't have any expenses? Maybe you haven't formed any sort of business yet. You're just a person with a DSLR, and maybe you've got a buddy who just wants you to come down and film them performing something cool at like a parking garage downtown. There's no crew, there's no equipment, no nothing. So then what? In a case like this, your biggest expense is not a financial one because you don't have anything to pay for to make that video work. So I recommend pivoting and focusing more on a time-based approach and thinking about how much time it's going to take you to complete that project. Try to estimate how long it's going to take you to complete that project, and that means the filming, the editing, the color grading, everything, and then start with a fair hourly wage for that, and then tweak the price as necessary. If you are not charging at least minimum wage for your work, even as a fresh beginner, you are undercharging. This should go without saying, but I think a lot of us devalue our creative work because we just so desperately want that next gig that we'll charge next to nothing. but that's just not sustainable, and that's not gonna help you be successful in this business. I know what it's like to be new and just wanna work and maybe be a little bit insecure about what you're able to produce. But at the end of the day, if you can walk into a minimum wage day job and they're gonna pay you that much when you have no training or education, you can pay yourself that much too. You're likely still gonna have some sort of expense, like maybe transportation, for example, just to get to the shoot. But the bulk of your pricing in this case should come from the time investment, because that's gonna be the main investment in making this video happen. And then you can sprinkle your extra expenses on top of that in your price. Once you have a hard number for what your expenses are, now all that's left to do is add the profit on top of that. Generally, as a beginner, I recommend starting out with a profit of 30 to 50% of the total project costs, not to be confused with 30 to 50% on top of your expenses. So for example, if you had an expense of $1,000 for the shoot, you should charge somewhere between $1,429 and $2,000 for the whole project. Again, this is just a suggested starting point for those who are at the beginning of their journey here. I'm gonna leave some links below for how you can do the math and calculate those percentages for yourself. In the majority of cases, I'm gonna recommend you lean towards the higher end of that scale, closer to 50%, because that's very standard for the industry, especially for things like weddings and corporate work. And then you can save the lower end of that scale for things like passion projects, or maybe you have a client that you really, really want to work with, but they just can't quite afford you right now, but you still want that project. There are going to be those rare times where you want to lower that price closer to that 30% range because the project provides some other benefit to you other than finances, like getting a new connection or just a really cool idea that you want to execute and have in your portfolio. Now, don't kill me for clickbait here, but there is an optional but extremely highly recommended fourth step that I recommend you take after every single project, just to make sure that you're still on track with your pricing. I recommend that every time you do a project, you keep a rough estimate of how many hours it took for you to complete. That way you can go back, and even if you don't charge hourly, which I am not really recommending you do anyways, you can look at the amount of hours it took you, you can compare that to the profit and figure out what your hourly wage ended up being for that project. If your expenses were $1,000 and you charged $2,000, that's a really good profit of $1,000 that you're walking away with. But if the project took you 120 hours to get done, that works out to $8.33. For a lot of us, that's not even minimum wage. If you come out with a low hourly wage like that, that's a really good indication that something needs to change. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to start charging more. I would recommend first looking at your workflow and making sure that you are working in an efficient way first. Maybe you're a very slow editor, or maybe it just took you forever to come up with the concept for this video, or maybe you've got a really old, slow computer that just slows everything down. If each project is taking up too much of your time, it restricts the amount of projects you're able to fit into your schedule. So if you can work efficiently, you're able to fit more projects in, and therefore you don't have that hard limit on how much money you're able to make and how much you're able to grow your business. So in short, the faster you work, the more money you're going to be able to make. So make sure you iron out those workflow issues first before you look back on a project and go, I need to charge more. Make sure that you're looking at the right issue and the right factor that's going into why you had such a low hourly wage in the first place. I hope this gives you a good place to start when you're trying to assign hard numbers to your video work. If you have any questions, I'm always here. And if you do enjoy this sort of business related content, let me know, because I do have a few scripts lying around and I'm thinking of continuing this for a while. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe for more stuff like this. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.